Hello everyone, my name is Megan Bridgewater and today I'll be sharing with you the biggest news stories of all time. To determine these stories, I researched from several different sites and combined my findings. All of these stories I will be sharing with you came from front page news articles. I will give you a brief overview of what happened in addition to an image of the newspaper. Let's get started. The Titanic set sail from England on April 10, 1912 for New York with 2,240 people on board. During the journey, the side of the ship hit an iceberg that slashed a 300-foot gash below the waterline. The boat managed to stay afloat for only 4 hours until it dove to its final resting place on April 15th. 705 people survived. About 16.5 million shares took place on the New York Stock Exchange on what came to be known as Black Tuesday. Billions of dollars were lost, many investors were wiped clean, and the machinery could not handle the large amount of trading. The aftermath of Black Tuesday led America into the Great Depression. During the 1920s, Congress passed the 18th Amendment, which prohibited making, selling, or transporting alcohol for drinking purposes. Drinkers gathered at speakeasies to avoid prohibition enforcement officers. In 1933, the 21st Amendment was passed, which ended the prohibition due to the high cost and failing enforcement. May 3, 1937, the Hindenburg left Frankfurt, Germany to travel across the Atlantic to Lakehurst Naval Air Base. The 804-foot airship was carrying 36 passengers and 61 crew when it suddenly burst into flames. It quickly fell 200 feet to the ground. 35 people were killed and several had severe injuries. Adolf Hitler killed himself by gunshot in his bunker in Berlin on April 30, 1945. His wife committed suicide with him by cyanide. Their remains were carried out of the bunker and burned. The remains were recovered and were placed in many graves until 1970 when they were displaced, cremated, and scattered. On May 8, 1945, America and Great Britain celebrated victory over the Nazi war machine. On this day, German troops throughout Europe put down their weapons after their leader, Adolf Hitler, killed himself. About 1 million soldiers attempted to flee to the west, but were taken capture by the Russians. On August 6th, the United States, with the consent of the United Kingdom, dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. These bombs killed about 129,000 people. These bombs ultimately made Japan surrender to the Allies and helped put an end to World War II. The Cuban Revolution was led by dictator Castro, whom had ties to the Soviet Union. Currently in war with the Soviet Union, Eisenhower planned to overthrow Castro. In April 1961, bombs attacked Cuban airfields. The main invasion landed at Bay of Pigs Beach, which ended in failure as the invaders surrendered and were imprisoned. The 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated November 22, 1963, in Dallas, Texas. He was shot by Lee Harvey Oswald during a motorcade. Kennedy was traveling with his wife, Jacqueline, and Texas Governor John Connally and his wife. Kennedy was the fourth president to be assassinated. Lyndon B. Johnson took his place. On April 4, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot by a sniper's bullet while staying at the Lorraine Motel. He was rushed to the hospital after being shot on a second-story balcony, which was pronounced dead. The night before, he gave a speech which concluded, "I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you. We, as a people, will get to the promised land." Neil Armstrong spoke his famous words on July 20th, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." After traveling 240,000 miles in 76 hours, Armstrong planted his foot on the moon's surface while millions watched from home. He planted a flag and plaque and safely completed the journey back to Earth. 37th President Richard Nixon became the first president to resign on August 9, 1974. After the Watergate scandal, Nixon was no longer trusted, and he decided that resigning was the best thing for America. Vice President Gerald Ford took his place to finish Nixon's remaining 2.5 years as president. November 9, 1989, Berlin citizens were free to cross the country's borders after a spokesman for East Berlin's Communist Party announced a change in the city's relations with the West. East and West Berlin people flocked to the wall and used anything they could to break down the barrier. The wall was gone and Berlin was united. Mandela was arrested for charges of sabotage, and in June 1964 he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. During the first 18 years, he was confined to a small cell with no bed or plumbing and was forced to do hard labor. A new president was inaugurated in 1989 and lifted the ban on him and made him a free man after 27 years. August 30th, Princess Diana died from her injuries during a car crash that killed her friend and the driver. Her bodyguard was the only survivor. Paparazzi was to blame, but the driver was drunk and lost control of the car and crashed into a road tunnel. The investigation proved that photographers were nowhere near the car when it crashed. September 11, 2001 is the day that 4 attacks on the United States took place. 2 hijacked planes by Al-Qaeda hit the Twin Towers and they collapsed in less than 2 hours. Another hijacked plane crashed into the west side of the Pentagon. The 4th plane was headed to Washington, D.C., but crashed in Pennsylvania after passengers tried to overcome the hijackers. Barack Obama was elected the 44th President of the United States. Sweeping away the last racial barrier, Obama became the first black chief executive. His call for a change in the direction of the country was almost as big as the symbolic movement in racial history, which some thought was impossible a few years earlier. Osama bin Laden, leader of Al-Qaeda, was killed in Pakistan on May 2, 2011. The United States Navy SEALs conducted the raid on bin Laden's compound. They took his body back to Afghanistan to identify him and buried him at sea within 24 hours of his death to honor Islamic traditions. You just saw 18 of the biggest news stories of all time. These stories shape the world we live in today. Over time, this list will continue to develop. The way that we learn about them might be different, but the newspaper will still be one way to preserve the historic headlines. Hope that you all found this information as interesting as I did.